We're going to be explaining the celestial events that relate to the birth of Jesus, and so discover the birth of Jesus. Now, there's a long history of people looking at the birth of Jesus narrative and trying to determine and understand what was the celestial event that relates to his birth time in order to learn what the actual date was. In the history of this subject, there are many unanswered questions, and it's full of uncertainty, and no one ever seems to have a conclusive answer. And so in this video, we're going to arrive at that conclusive answer. Now, the Word of God speaks of stars in relationship to Jesus. Here we have Jesus calling himself in Revelations 22, verse 16, the bright and morning star. And he's referring to the planet Venus, which is close to the sun and often comes up over the morning horizon before the sun does. So with the contrast of a dark background, it will look particularly bright. And so it's an appropriate analogy for Jesus because he's the regular, everyday, morning, exceptionally bright and beautiful morning star. He's the beginning of our everyday. He's the brightest, and he's the best of the stars in its brightness and beauty every single day. It's to remind us of him every day, and to remind us of the grace that he affords us each and every day, and to be thankful for him every day. And so it's very appropriate that in this particular case, he's referred to a star in relationship to our experience with the planet Venus, which is called a wandering star when they didn't realize what planets were. They were called wandering stars instead. Another star event that the Wisemen speak of that was prophesied to be the event that would mark his birth. And this happens during the time of Balaam, when that prophecy was made, that a star would come out of Israel. And so the wise men come to Herod and they say, "Where is he that is born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star." And so we introduce this video with these ideas that stars are related to Jesus. And we're going to look for that star, and we're going to find it, and we're going to know when Jesus was born. In this first little clip, we're just summarizing some of the misunderstanding and erroneous conclusions that have been arrived at concerning the birth of Jesus.
The exact birth date of Jesus is not definitively known, and historical records do not provide a specific date. Most scholars suggest that Jesus was likely born between 6 and 4 BCE, based on historical references related to King Herod and the Roman census. The traditional celebration of Christmas on December 25th does not correspond to a specific historical date, but was established in the 4th century AD, possibly to coincide with pagan festivals. Various theories suggest other dates, but there is no consensus among historians.
Now, in this section, I try to give you just a little appreciation for how this study was done. When you look at the scriptures themselves and you read a verse and you don't understand something, often you just don't have enough information. It might be that there are other verses that you need to know about in relationship to the one that you're speaking of, because the Bible is full of connections. And you need to make those connections, which are data points. They're separate pieces of information. But when you collect all the pieces, you can turn informational pieces into understanding. You see the flow that all those different pieces of information make into a more complete understanding. And there's quite a bit of difference between knowing separate individual pieces of knowledge and assembling them together into an understanding. And this is what I've attempted to do and accomplished. And it really begins by, yes, putting the different verses together analogies, typology, numbers, right? Bringing them together. But then, in this particular study, you have to learn, in a sense, from scratch, God's gospel message in the celestial heavens. And first, you need to learn that God created those heavens and He created them for signs. And then you can accept that they are a gospel message. And once you start looking at them, you start to see how biblical they are, how often they are represented inside of God's prophecies, inside of His prophetic books, and how they are overtly employed in His prophecies. We literally understand. Balaam speaks of a star. The wise men saw a star. These are verses and prophecies that are introducing us to the concept that the celestial heavens contain God's word. And they become, once understood, the prophetic timestamps. So that as seekers of the word of God, who believe in God, the creator of the heavens, He allows us into understanding His celestial word, how to read His clock, how to see His interpretations of His prophecies by giving us the time frames, the time stamps. And all of it begins with the birth of Jesus. It is the schoolmaster of learning how to read the celestial heavens. And from there, we move on to other prophetic occurrences where celestial heavens are employed. And you can find those and understand those prophecies along with their timestamps.
To learn about the birth date of Jesus, you can follow these steps. 1. Read historical texts. Begin with the New Testament, particularly the Gospels of Matthew and Luke, which contain nativity narratives. Note that these do not provide a specific birth date. 2. Consult scholarly sources. Look for books and articles written by biblical scholars and historians that analyze the historical context of Jesus' life. 3. Examine historical context. Research the time period of King Herod, as his reign provides a timeline for estimating Jesus' birth. 4. Study calendar systems. Familiarize yourself with the Jewish calendar and the Roman calendar, as discrepancies between these can affect dating. 5. Engage with online resources. Use reputable websites, online lectures, and databases dedicated to biblical history. 6. Join discussion groups. Participate in forums or study groups focused on biblical history to engage with others and share insights. 7. Consult academic journals. Look for articles in journals that specialize in biblical studies or ancient history for the latest research. By combining these resources, you can develop a well-rounded understanding of the debates and historical context surrounding the birth date of Jesus.
In this section, we're going to begin to cover the four witnesses. And the four witnesses are, in the book of Esther, an Adar 13 date is chosen by God. The second witness is Josephus, who is born about 37 AD, 10 years after Jesus died, who wrote a history of the Jews, recording that just before Herod dies, there's a blood moon on a Purim fast day of Adar 13. And we learned that this is the date that the Bethlehem children are killed. The third witness is that the Wisemen physically lay eyes and hands upon the child Jesus when he's about 2 years old, after following the prophecies of Balaam, the star, and Daniel's 70 weeks, providing the years to Jesus. And the fourth witness now is the astronomy application, which is a technology that allows us to see God's gospel in the heavens as recorded by the movement of planetary and lunar objects. Just like the printing press was a new technology that enabled us to have and read and study God's gospel written on paper. It was written on paper, and its timeline and its appointed times were written in the heavens, as specified in the 14th verse of Genesis chapter 1, that God made the sun, moon, and stars for signs and for seasons, which means Moedim, appointed times. And through that astronomy application, we can find the Balaam star, which is a triple conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn that happens in 7 BC and has concluding events that lead to the very day Jesus was born, which is a 280-day endpoint from the conception day. And all of the days of the nativity narrative are specified in celestial positions from the time of the conception of John the Baptist, even before that, to the time Gabriel visits Zacharias, right through to the time Herod dies and the Passover a couple of weeks afterwards, to the conclusion in which Jesus and his family can come out of Egypt and they go to settle in Nazareth.
In a court of law, God always required at least 2 witnesses. We find these 2 witnesses. Number 1, in the selection of a date in Esther chapter 3, verses 7 and 13. And number 2, on the same date as specified in the book of Esther, we find within the writings of Josephus a lunar eclipse occurred on a celebrated day of fasting just before Herod dies. We will follow these witnesses to know where they lead. The first witness.
Haman, favored by King Ahasuerus, plotted the Jews' destruction. After Mordecai refused to honor him, Haman convinced the king to issue a decree ordering the Jews' annihilation on the 13th of Adar, offering a large sum of money to the royal treasury. The decree, written in various languages, was sent throughout the kingdom.
Esther 3 verse 7. In the first month, that is the month Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, they cast pur, that is the lot, before Haman from day to day, and from month to month to the 12th month, that is the month Adar.
Let's review this verse and establish what is going on. So it's in the first month, and the month is called Nisan, the Jewish name for the first month of the year that is called the religious year. And that's when they begin. And what they're doing is casting pur. Now, casting pur is like a lottery. It could be just like a stone with a marking on one side, but not the other side, so that you can distinguish favorable or unfavorable. As they cast the lot, they begin the first month, Nisan 1. And they continue to cast the lot day to day and from month to month, which means they select day 1, they cast the lot, and the lot will say either yes, that is the day to record into the law books. If it says no, you advance to Nisan 2. You continue to advance through the days, from day to day and from month to month. And so this is what they did. And it said no, and no, and no, and no, and no, and no, and no, for a considerable number of days, all in a row. And the understanding is that they are thinking that they are appealing, using the lot, casting the pur, that their gods are providing the answer. We allowed the gods to make the decision as to the day. They're consulting their gods for advice. And, this is what kings did when they were making big decisions. And we have a situation, though, where apparently their gods are saying no a great many times in a row.
Esther 3 verse 13. And the letters were sent by posts into all the king's provinces to destroy, to kill, and to cause to perish all Jews, both young and old, little children and women, in one day, even upon the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month Adar, and to take the spoil of them for a prey.
So it's not their God that is saying no. 11 months and 11 days. It amounts to 345 days that the God Yahweh is saying no. As we ponder what these two verses are telling us, God has chosen the date. And it's not going to be just any old random date, because he's waited these 345 days before he finally says yes, Adar 13. He's deliberately, systematically saying no until they get to a certain correct date. The date means something. We don't know what it is yet, but clearly this date is a very, very important date to God. The odds or the chances of 50-50 rolling a dice where there's only two choices and getting only one of those choices ever show up for 345 times in a row is astoundingly large, highly improbable amount. That is the understanding that this date is clearly and specifically intentioned by God. Not just, God's just making sure the children of Israel have, almost a whole year to prepare. That may be true, might be practical, but that is just something invented. It's clearly not an invention to say that God is picking the date, and he's picking a very, very, very special date to him.
Proverbs 16, verse 33. The lot is cast into the lap, but its every decision is from the Lord.
Witness number 2.
Josephus provides crucial information that reiterates God's genocide date coincident with the life of Jesus. Flavius Josephus was a 1st-century Jewish historian born around AD 37 in Jerusalem. He played a significant role during the Jewish War against Rome, AD 66-73, initially as a general in the Jewish forces. After being captured by the Romans, he became a Roman citizen and adopted the name Flavius in honor of the Roman Emperor Vespasian. Josephus is best known for his works The Jewish War, which chronicles the Jewish revolt against Roman rule, and Antiquities of the Jews, a comprehensive history of the Jewish people from creation to the outbreak of the war. His writings provide valuable insights into Jewish history, culture, and the context of early Christianity. His accounts are considered crucial for understanding the period, although they are sometimes viewed with skepticism due to his pro-Roman stance and potential biases. Josephus's works have influenced both historical scholarship and religious thought, making him a key figure in the study of ancient history. He died around AD 100.
Of the many resources available, it is Josephus who provides a detailed account of events leading up to the death of Herod and the Passover that immediately follows. In fact, the historical account of Josephus leading up to Herod's death overlaps with the historical moment that the Wisemen are visiting Herod recorded in Matthew 2. We can know this by an examination of the details Josephus provides that this period includes a blood moon and a regularly celebrated and observed Hebrew fast day, both coincident on the same day, short period before Herod dies. Flavius Josephus provides detailed accounts of the final years of King Herod the Great, particularly in his work Antiquities of the Jews. Here are some key points regarding the time just before Herod's death. For BC 1. Herod's health. Josephus describes Herod as suffering from severe health issues, including a painful and debilitating illness. He details symptoms that may suggest a combination of physical ailments, leading to a decline in his ability to govern effectively. 2. Paranoia and suspicion. In the latter part of his reign, Herod became increasingly paranoid. He suspected those around him, including family members, of plotting against him. Josephus recounts how Herod executed several individuals, including his own sons, due to these fears. 3. Political instability. Herod's reign was marked by political instability. As he approached death, there were tensions within his family and among various factions in Judea, contributing to an atmosphere of uncertainty. 4. Succession plans. Josephus notes that Herod made arrangements for the succession of his kingdom. Initially, he had designated his son Archelaus as his heir, but he also considered dividing the kingdom among his other sons, which reflected his concerns about loyalty and stability. 5. Final orders. In a dramatic moment before his death, Herod reportedly ordered that prominent Jewish leaders be gathered to be executed upon his death, hoping to ensure that mourning would occur at his passing, even if he could not be mourned himself. 6. Death and aftermath. Herod died shortly after these events, and Josephus describes the reactions to his death, including the subsequent power struggles among his heirs and the challenges faced by the Roman authorities in managing the region. Josephus' accounts provide a vivid picture of the tumultuous final years of Herod's reign, marked by personal strife and broader political challenges.
Now that we have covered a brief summary of the person Josephus and the nature of his writings, we're going to zero in on evening. That's just before Josephus records a blood moon on a fast day, which is the fast of Purim. And the blood moon is happening on the same day, which is March 13, 4 BC, on the same day as the Adar 13, that was the date selected by God in the book of Esther, in which there's a blood moon occurring at 2:30 a.m. in the morning.
Josephus, Antiquities of the Jews. A brief summary of the foregoing. Herod replaced Matthias as high priest, installing Joser. This decision followed Matthias's inability to serve as high priest for one day, a day in which a lunar eclipse was identified the night before a regularly celebrated fasting day in which Matthias was unable to officiate. Herod, the day before the blood moon, killed a different Matthias and his rebellious companions. Herod's death followed the execution of Antipater. His will bequeathed significant wealth to Caesar and others. Though fortunate in his rise to power and longevity, Herod's family life was deemed unfortunate. Following Herod's death, Archelaus observed a 7-day mourning period after which was a Passover. Upon its ending, Archelaus sailed to Rome to confirm the reign to himself. Book 27, Chapter 6, Section 4. Herod deprived Matthias of the high priesthood, as in part an occasion of this action, and made Joser, who was Matthias's wife's brother, high priest in his stead. Now it happened, that during the time of the high priesthood of this Matthias, there was another person made high priest for a single day, that very day which the Jews observed as a fast. The occasion was this Matthias the high priest, on the night before that day when the fast was to be celebrated, seemed, in a dream, to have conversation with his wife, and because he could not officiate himself on that account, Joseph, the son of Elimas, his kinsman, assisted him in that sacred office. But Herod deprived this Matthias of the high priesthood, and burnt the other Matthias, who had raised the sedition, with his companions, alive. And that very night there was an eclipse of the moon. Chapter 7. Herod has thoughts of killing himself with his own hand. Chapter 8.
Concerning Herod's death, and testament, and burial. Section 1. When he had done these things, he died, the 5th day after he had caused Antipater to be slain, having reigned, since he had procured Antigonus to be slain, 34 years, but since he had been declared king by the Romans, 37. A man he was of great barbarity towards all men equally, and a slave to his passion. Section 4. Now Archelaus paid him so much respect, as to continue his mourning till the 7th day, for so many days are appointed for it by the law of our fathers. Chapter 9. How the people raised a sedition against Archelaus, and how he sailed to Rome. Section 3. Now, upon the approach of that feast of unleavened bread, which the law of their fathers had appointed for the Jews at this time, which feast is called the Passover. After Archelaus was sailed for Rome, and Varus was removed to Antioch, Sabinus went to Jerusalem, and seized on the king's palace.
Now that we have reviewed the Josephus passages that describe the events leading up to the death of King Herod, we want to zero in on this one particular section that describes what is going on with the high priest the night of the blood moon, which is the following day is the fast of Purim. And we read here, now it happened that during the time of the high priesthood of this Matthias, Matthias the high priest, there was another person made high priest for a single day. And we're going to hear the story of why that was. And it's that very day which the Jews observed as a fast. And so this is a not some ad hoc fast. This is a regularly observed fast, annually observed fast. Of course, in the story here, we know that Herod dies, and a couple weeks later or so, there's the Passover. So the only fast of all the Jewish fasts that are happening about a month before the Passover is only the fast of Purim. It's the only one that it can possibly be. The occasion was this. This Matthias, the high priest, right, is on the night before that day when the fast was to be celebrated. Okay, so it's the night and then the next day. The night is the blood moon, and then the daylight is the fast. So during that night, these things happened. This high priest seemed in a dream to have conversation with his wife. So he's talking to his wife about his dreams during the night because he could not, and so this is going on all night. And because of that, he could not officiate himself on that account, on the account that he was up all night with dreams. So it was that Joseph, the son of Elymas, his kinsman, right, assisted him in that sacred office. But Herod deprived this Matthias of the high priesthood. Okay. Now there was another Matthias who was part of a sedition. He got burnt along with some others by Herod, burnt alive. And that happened like during the day before that night. And that very night, right, there was an eclipse of the moon. There you have an eclipse of the moon that very night, and then the next day is the fast day. And so the fast day we know is Adar 13. So all we have to do is see what year there was a blood moon and that would have coincided with the Adar 13 fast day. So we have a date and we have a blood moon. Josephus tells us when Herod dies. He says 37 years after he started reigning. And he started reigning at 40 BC. So minus 37, you'd have like 3 BC. But the answer is going to actually be 4 BC. So there might be some, we don't know how they counted, and somehow it's off by a year. Josephus said 37. It should have been, 36. He reigned for 36 years. We can go look in the Stellarium app and look at what do we find for blood moons and their dates. When we look at the catalog of lunar eclipse, we find very simply in 4 BC, which would be a -3, you have a March 13. So this is a blood moon on March 13, 4 BC. Now, the fast is on Adar 13. But what we find is that this is a Adar 2. It's an Adar 2 because that's the 13th month that they're catching up to the solar cycle. And so the numbers are the same. The Gregorian numbers match the Hebrew numbers because they're catching up to the regular solar cycle. Here's the Jewish calendar, March 13, 4 BC, and you can see it's an Adar 2. And it's a 13, and we know it's 13 because it's a full moon and a blood moon, which is usually a 15, but because they're catching up, it's actually a 13. Full moon, blood moon, right, on March 13, 4 BC. And it's right at the arm of Virgo, right? You can see in the calendar, full moon, March 13. Partial lunar eclipse, 3:41 in the morning. And so that's when soldiers would go to, if you're going to kill babies, you go early in the morning. Everyone's asleep. You're going to go sort of house to house, catch people off guard when they're asleep. Now that we've isolated from Josephus the blood moon on the fast day, and we come to realize that it's a March 13 and an Adar 13, which is the fast of Purim. And that fast of Purim started when God chose that date in the book of Esther. And the date represented a genocide date. And also in the story of Jesus at this time, as the Wisemen are visiting, they do go and visit and set eyes on the child, but they have to leave right away and not return to Herod. And then immediately, Joseph and Mary have to leave for Egypt because Herod is sending his soldiers to kill the 2-year-olds and under in Bethlehem. And that's a genocide of those 2-year-olds. And so it's not a stretch to have a theory that the Adar 13 genocide date with a blood moon is the same day that the children in Bethlehem are also being killed, that same night, the night of the blood moon. Now, if that's the case, then we only need to go back a few days to get to the point where the wise men are beginning their southward travel to Bethlehem in order to potentially see what it was they saw in the heavens, in which they rejoiced with exceeding great joy, because they're seeing this star again. They've traveled a long way, made a big investment, a big gamble. They've done a lot of research. They've understood the prophecies, but they're still not 100% sure that all of their effort is going to be fruitful. And so when they do see the star again, they're very excited because it makes them feel good about that everything is going to be as they expected according to the prophecies, which means they were right. They accurately discerned everything to the point where it all comes to fruition when they get to see the Messiah. And it describes the motion of the star. The star which they saw went before them, and it's traveling before them and eventually stood over where the young child was, straight up in the sky, or overhead. And so what the pictures don't do it justice as to what is really going on. In the morning, when they see the star, because it's just normal planets, they see it in the horizon in the morning. And as they walk the 6 hours to Bethlehem, like all planets, it begins to rise in the sky above them. And it's moving from left to right. It's going before them. So it would have that appearance that it's going ahead of them, but moving from left to right. And in this picture, they're seeing it on their left. Now, the star high in the sky in the picture is not accurate because that star is too high. It starts off low as I've placed it there, Mars and Saturn, because the same 6 hours it takes for them to travel to Bethlehem, it takes for that combination of planets to move from low on the eastern horizon to straight overhead on the looking due south. And so that the movement, the 6 hour movement of the Wisemen is coordinated with the 6 hour movement of the Mars-Saturn conjunction, so that it moves with them, and as they enter into Bethlehem, going due south, it is straight overhead, stood overhead where the child was in Bethlehem. It just means that it's high noon as they're facing south, and that's the normal movement of a planetary object. And so that star depicted high in the sky is not accurate for the 8:30 in the morning hour when they begin their travel. And the picture I've placed where the Mars-Saturn is in the east is more accurate of that moment, of what they're seeing in that moment. What you're seeing in the picture with this star, which again, it's not a single star, it's this conjunction, because this conjunction is the tail end of the star event. There was a single star event that occurred every time the Jupiter and Saturn conjuncted over this 9-month period and came together looking like one big bright star. But the Mars-Saturn was part of the very tail end events, which they're excited to see again. Vantage point. This is March the 6th. So the Wisemen are approaching Jerusalem. And you see, Mars and Saturn are not, they're not lined up yet. You see, you can see they're off. And then when you get to March the 7th, they're still not quite, it's hard to see, but they're not quite even. Right? But when you get to March the 8th, now you can see how perfectly lined up they are. You can see they're straight in a line on March the 8th. Right? You can tell if you go to the 9th now, you can see they're off. They're not, you can see they're not together. But so the perfect day is March the 8th. That's when they're really lined up. Okay? So that's the day. The 7th is when they're visiting with Herod. And then it's the morning of the 8th when they're perfectly lined up. That's what they're looking at. That's what they see. So this is the morning. There you have Mars and Saturn. And they're seeing this in the east. But they're walking due south, okay, which is here. So they're walking from Jerusalem south. And then on their left, they see the Mars-Saturn, see on their left. And now they're walking, and as they're walking, the star that they had seen before, Mars-Saturn, which are right beside each other, right, are moving towards them, right? And the same amount of time, see, we started around like 8:30, and now we're 1300, so that's 1. So you're approaching 2 o'clock in the afternoon, okay? So there's 3 o'clock, about 1500, okay? So you're at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So it's now been about 6 hours, and that's about how long it might take to walk from Jerusalem to Bethlehem. And the star now is over top where the child is. It's straight over top of Bethlehem. So that's the movement of the wise men, literally on the earth, is 6 hours to get to Bethlehem, and the star moves from east to south, also in 6 hours. Right? So the movement of the celestial objects is coordinated with the movement of the people on the earth, so that star would be directly overhead Bethlehem right at the appointed time, right? The sign is exactly where it needs to be at the exact appointed time when the event, which is the wise men arriving in Bethlehem, occurs. That's how precise this is. And so that movement of the star that people always think is some sort of mythical, unusual type of movement that makes them think the star is a supernatural event is not correct. It's a normal movement, just normal, but it's an appointed time. So it's a coordinated movement. March the 7th, they tell Herod 2 years diligently, accurately, when was the child born? 2 years ago. That's why he sends the soldiers and tells them to kill the 2-year-olds according to the time that the wise men told him. And so you go back 2 years, 1, 2, okay, and you're going to go back just 2 more days, 1, 2, and you get to March the 5th, Mars, Jupiter, okay? This is the tail end of the star. So this is why we know that the March the 8th, Mars Saturn, is the star they saw again, because when we go back 2 years and 2 days, we connect with the Mars Jupiter. And then if you keep going back, you will have the star effect, the Jupiter and Saturn staying together for 6 months. And they conjunct 3 times, and it leads all the way back to May 29, new moon. And when you calculate the number of days between the May 29 new moon, March the 5th, there's the May 29, first conjunction, all the way to March the 5th is 280 normal human gestation days. So that March the 8th, 4 BC, is correct because 2 years prior, it leads you to, you go 2 years prior, just like it says, you come right to Mars, Jupiter. And then you follow that back and you see the Mars, Saturn. So you can see how each are connected. Okay. And then, of course, the next connection is when you go back to March the 5th and you go 44 more days. Now, the woman had to have 8 days to the circumcision and her purification. And then it was another 32 days after that, for a total of 40 days before they could present the child in the temple.
Leviticus 12 verses 2 to 4 speak unto the children of Israel, saying, If a woman have conceived seed, and born a man-child, then she shall be unclean 7 days, according to the days of the separation for her. Infirmity shall she be unclean. 3. And in the 8th day the flesh of his foreskin shall be circumcised. 4. And she shall then continue in the blood of her purifying 33 days. She shall touch no hallowed thing, nor come into the sanctuary, until the days of her purifying be fulfilled.
And we find when you go 44 days, you come to the April the 18 solar eclipse. So here you'll see April 18 annular solar eclipse. It's at 1740, which is about 5:40 p.m. And there it is. Okay, so let's turn it up this way. April the 18, and there it is there. We're going to look at the moon, and we're going to get closer to it. Okay, and when you get just right, okay, it looks like they don't touch, you see. You think, oh, it's not a real solar eclipse, but you can see, right here, see, they do actually touch, and that's a kiss. So the reason why this solar eclipse is so perfect, it is a solar eclipse. They do overlap, and this is Jerusalem, you see. All right, so it is Jerusalem at the right time, and but it's just a kiss, you see. So if you take a look on the NASA catalog, so here it is here, 6 BC, April the 18th, and here the epicenter is in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, and this green line here shows that it's going right through Jerusalem, right on the edge, right at this solid green line. So Jerusalem is on the very, very, very edge of visibility. And so that's why it's just a kiss, just a little kiss, very, very on the edge of visibility. But it does actually have a solar eclipse in the evening, right? 1741 in the evening, and you can see it barely. And of course, this is fulfilling this particular verse. So, show us thy mercy, O Lord, and grant us thy salvation, which is Jesus. I will hear what God the Lord will speak, for he will speak peace unto his people and to his saints, but let them not turn again to folly. Now, when he's speaking, so it's this celestial event in which he's speaking, right? Surely his salvation is nigh, right? So this is because Jesus is in the temple for the first time. Salvation is near them that fear him, that glory may dwell in our land. And when he is presented in the temple, right? Simon and Anna, them that fear him, right? Two very faithful people have the opportunity to meet Jesus. Them that fear him, that glory may dwell in our land, right? So they get to see the glory of Jesus when he's a baby in the temple. They get to meet him. Mercy and truth are met together, right? So Jesus is meeting these faithful people, Simeon and Anna, but it's also God, right? Mercy is God, truth is Jesus, are met together. Righteousness is God, and peace is Jesus, have kissed each other. Truth is Jesus, shall spring out of the earth, right? And righteousness, God, shall look down from heaven, right? So this is God looking down from heaven, and he's speaking. And yea, the Lord shall give that which is good, when he gave us Jesus, and our land shall yield her increase. Righteousness, which is God, shall go before him and shall set us in the way of his path, right? So this one's God, right? And his is Jesus. So this psalm is describing that solar eclipse. God meeting Jesus, and they have kissed each other, because that's a kissing solar eclipse. God and Jesus are meeting when Jesus is presented in the temple. It's 44 days after he was born. April the 18th, 6 BC. This is the full moon when Jesus is born. You can see March the 5th, and it's about 10 o'clock. And you have a nice full moon in Virgo in Israel. And this obviously is quite useful for the shepherds, because they are out in the fields and they would like to walk into the town. And if they have a full moon, they can really see where they're going. It's very appropriate that the shepherds have a full moon to see their way to finding Jesus, the light. Okay, they have the light to do that. When you go to the next full moon, it's only 30 days away, April the 4th. Notice that it's a blood moon. Here, now, this full moon is the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. It's a full moon. That's the 15th of Nisan. But Mary, being only 30 days after he's born, is missing the Passover. She's still ceremonially unclean, and she cannot attend the Passover. So, her and Jesus, he's only 30 days old, are going to miss this Passover. And so her being unclean is symbolized by the blood moon. But because it's a prophetic Passover, it's at her feet, because all the Passovers that are significant seem to be at her feet. If you go another half cycle back to the new moon, which was April the 18th, and we come to looking at this, and what we see is Mercury, Mars, that's 2, Jupiter is 3, Saturn is 4, Venus is 5, and Uranus 6. You have 6 out of the 7 planets. You can see them there, all in a row, on the day, plus the sun and the moon, okay, all on the day that he is to be presented in the temple. This is the day 44, April the 18th. And so here's the lineup. You can see all the planets: Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. Now Neptune, if you could see it with the naked eye, you could see it in the morning as well. Scorpius. And then a comet, 73P, is here in Aquarius. So the span, you have a comet and all of the planets in a row. They span 1, 2, 3, 4 constellations. That would take about 4 hours in the sky to go by, which is pretty narrow. That's a pretty narrow scope. All lined up, and it's, as it were, standing to attention as he's presented in the temple. All the planets are standing to attention. But it recalls for me a particular verse, and that's the verse that Joseph says describing his dream. You see, Genesis 37, verse 9. And he dreamed yet another dream, and told it his brethren, and said, Behold, I have dreamed a dream more, and behold, the sun and the moon and the 11 stars made obeisance to me. This looks all in a row, 4 constellations, about 4 hours. You also have Uranus here as well, which is here, okay? But you're not going to see Uranus with the naked eye. You're going to see Venus, Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, and Mercury. Joseph is saying he sees the sun and the moon and 11 stars, which presumes you're not including yourself. He's the Jupiter, the Jesus star, in the middle, which is in the middle. So if you count 11, Venus and Saturn is 2, and Mars and Mercury makes 4. And then you conveniently have Pleiades here. And Pleiades is known as the Seven Sisters. You can see that here. So you have 7 sisters. So it's 7 stars, Pleiades, plus Mercury, Mars, Saturn, and Venus. 11 stars that are on either side of Jupiter, which would be Joseph, along with the sun and the moon. So it's interesting that there is a way to see this just the way Joseph saw it, in the context that on this day, April the 18th of 6 BC, the 44th day after Jesus was born, he's being presented in the temple. And the stars are all standing up for him. And it mimics Joseph's dream that his mother and father and 11 brothers would show honor to him. And here they are, literally 11 stars, sun and moon, that we can see, all with the naked eye, giving honor, with Jesus, Jupiter, in the very center, right below Aries, the ram caught in a thicket, Jesus on the cross, and Jesus, Taurus, the red heifer. This is the final sign that's connected with the birth of Jesus. We've seen so many things that are connected to this point in time now. Mars, Saturn, Juno come together February 21. Mary settles into Bethlehem. 12 days later, Mars, Jupiter, Juno, March the 5th. March the 5th is actually an Adar 15, which is the high celebrated feast day, Shushan Purim, Adar 15. So in 6 BC, March 5th, Gregorian date, equals Adar 15, the Jewish date. So on his birthday, they're celebrating Shushan Purim every year for 2,500 years. They're keeping his birthday, but they don't realize it. Now, 8 days later, he's circumcised. It's a March 13. Exactly 2 years later is going to be March 13, 4 BCE, blood moon, children in Bethlehem get killed. On Jesus's cutting off the flesh, circumcision day, 2 years later is a cutting off of the children of Bethlehem as Jesus escapes that genocide, just as March 13, 4 BC was also an Adar 13, the day of Purim, the day that was set aside for the genocide of the Jews by Haman. So, in addition to all of these dates surrounding March the 5th and on March 5th that are coordinating with the biblical dates. So this isn't just March 5th and it's just any old date. March 5th is a biblical date, right? In addition, of course, it's spring. All lambs and goats only breed seasonally in the fall, September, October. They're biologically designed to only breed in the fall. And then they have a gestation period of 5 months. So if they conceived in September, October, November, December, January, end of February, the sheep or the goat would be born early March, towards the end of February, early March, 5 months, anywhere between September, October, right? Jesus was born March 5th, right? End of February, 5-month gestation period. He's born March 5th. So he's right inside this rough calculation sweet spot between that when lambs are conceived and when lambs are born, right? So that he's born in the spring, because the lambs have to be of the first year. So when the lambs are sacrificed in Passover, they're about 13 months old. They're never old enough to have reproduced, never old enough to have mated, right? So these are virgin lambs, right? That's the whole point. It's a pure lamb, not only in its unblemished nature, but it has also never mated. It's about 13 months old. This is the stuff that you have to understand, that the analogy, the Passover analogy, everything about the Passover is an analogy, and all of it has to fit and be perfectly in coordination with the nature of Jesus and his life, right? So he has to fulfill the Passover lamb, and lambs are only born in the spring. So Jesus is born in the spring. So now, on top of all of this, the comet. The comet moves like this, and let's just go through this quickly. There's March 5th. We're going to go backwards. And as we go backwards, you can see the comet's going backwards. And it's moving with Mars here. Okay. Now, Mars swoops in, and when you get to February 21, the comet, Mars, and Saturn are in alignment. Mary settles into Bethlehem. 12 days later, March the 5th, the comet, Mars, Jupiter, and Juno, if you can see it, are in alignment. 4 things line up February 21, Mary settles in Bethlehem. 4 things line up March the 5th. That in itself is highly significant. The comet is particularly special because you can see the sun is right here. And it's not only that the comet is lining up, but the sun is in the right position along with the comet, so that the comet is close enough to the sun to be warming up. This perspective probably doesn't do it justice, but when you zoom in, the comet is close enough to the sun to be melting, and the debris is getting pushed off in the solar winds by the solar winds, and it's the light from the sun is reflecting off of it, so it's making this big colorful light show. And here, right on March the 5th. Now if we go back in time, you get to February 21 and it's not really there. Okay. Now if we brighten this up just a little bit more above normal, okay, I'm just going to go to 1, I guess it's normal, and there you see it. If you go back before that, it's diminishing very quickly, right? You don't see it. So it ramps up. It gets pretty visible when Mary settles into Bethlehem, and then each day that goes by, it just keeps getting more and more and more until you get to the 5th. And it's magnificently long trail from this comet, which would not happen unless the sun was also in the right spot for this comet to show up, right? There's sunset, right? And then when the sun is set, there you're seeing it. You're going to see this in the night sky, okay? And you're going to see it day by day. Every night, you're going to catch this. Just as after the sun sets, it is close to the sun, okay? So you're not going to see it for very long because it's close to the sun, and the sun's setting, then it's going to set. But you get some, there's 6:30, right? Or that's 7:30. There's 6:30. The sun starts to set at 6:30, 7:30, 8:30, right? You're going to see it for a couple of hours. But you're going to see this for a couple of hours every night. Now, you're also going to see it likely like in the daytime, even though the sun is up, right? You're going to see this during the day because this is very bright, like super bright. You're going to see Jupiter all day long. In the middle of the day, you could see Jupiter, even though the sun is up. because Jupiter is just that bright. You could see it in the daytime. But as you get to in the morning, like if you were in the morning, right, the sun is going to come up, and then it'll be up, but still 8:30 in the morning, you might still see this at 8:30 in the morning because it's not too bright yet. It might still be, when it's positioned like this and the sun is up, but it's just on the horizon, right? You still might see it because these are very bright things. A comet would be very, very bright. And so here it is. And we're going to zoom in, and there's the look of it. And then as you go beyond March the 5th, it's going to start to diminish, right? And when you go back, okay, February 21 through March 5th. So it explodes in light right in this period, okay? But now look at the actual movement. When you bring it back and you go back in time, you can see that it moves towards Jupiter, and then it's going to go around Jupiter and back. It's not only going to be bright for days, but look at the way it moves, and it accentuates Jupiter by moving around Jupiter and going like this. At the same time as its brightness, its tail, is growing and growing and growing as it gets to Jupiter, and the tail diminishes as it's passing backwards. So this is a spectacular light show, and movement, not just the light, but the movement is saying, look at me, look at Jupiter. Let's look. Jupiter represents Jesus, is getting glorified by the light of this comet. And comets are always very exciting because everything else is just a point of light, but comets create a light show. It's this long, bright tail, and it moves in different directions. And we even get excited when we see the contrails from an airplane, the smoke that comes out the back of an airplane, and you see this bright streak of exhaust from a jet engine, and it's just fascinating to see, like someone has taken a pen and like written on the heavens this stroke of light, right? And we notice it. It's different, and so we notice it, and we like to see them. Oh, there's a plane, right? Well, same thing. Oh, there's a comet. Wow, look how spectacular that light is, and look at the way it's moving and accentuating Jupiter. And so this particular sign is so special. Is what conceivably are the odds that all of these planetary objects are coming into play and accentuating and causing an explosion of light to occur on this one day? A comet, Mars, Jupiter, and Juno. And Mars is red. Mary is giving birth, right? So it's a bloody, unclean thing, okay? So Mars is present because of that. But it said the seed would be in many waters. So this is all happening in Pisces, just like Balaam's prophecy said. His seed shall be in many waters. And there's Juno, an asteroid, which is there to represent a seed. It looks just like a little asteroid is there as well, playing the part of the seed. All happening. Not only is it all happening, but it's also all happening in the place of many waters, just like the prophecy says. So it's astounding how many things are coming into play on this March 5th, 6 BC, which is a biblical date. It is a Shushan Purim 8R15 date, a celebration date. And when Jesus was born, the angels were celebrating, and they put on a light show for the shepherds as well, right? This comet is putting on a light show. The angels put on a light show for the shepherds. And it being a full moon invited them to walk from out in the fields where all they have is darkness and stars. But they have the full moon. And they're also seeing this comet. I mean, if it's just before sunset, a couple of hours before sunset, they're going to see this comet as well, along with the angels and their invitation. So it's just amazing how the verses and what's going on in the verses, right? Angels are shining a bright light, the comet's shining a bright light, how there's correlation between what's actually happening in today's modern astronomical tool and on the ground, literally on the date that this is going on. So this is just in way of quick summary. We wanted to understand, just review the 413s, right? So there's an 8R13 in the book of Esther, and that becomes the fast of Purim. And then Jesus is born 6 BC, March the 5th. But 8 days later, he's circumcised, the cutting off of the flesh, right? It's a March 13, 6 BCE. And the genocide that was chosen, 8R13, right, is a genocide date, the cutting off of the nation of Israel, which also means the cutting off of the Messiah, right? And so it's there's a similarity in what's going on those two similar dates. And then when you get to 4 BC, right, it's an 8R2 13, which shouldn't be a full moon, but it is. It is because it's an 8R2, and they're catching up to the solar system. So it's not going to be on the lunar cycle. A lunar cycle, the 15th would be the full moon. So this is being modified to get back to the solar system, solar cycle. So it's a 8R2 13 with a full moon, and it also is a blood moon. And in the Gregorian calendar, it's a March 13, a full moon, a blood moon, and it's happening 5 days after a Mars-Saturn combination that existed 2 years prior. So when the Wisemen were excited to see the star again, they're seeing a Mars-Saturn, and they tell Herod the child was born 2 years prior, when in the time frame when they had seen a Mars-Saturn before, 2 years prior. And this is why they're excited to see it again. And this is happening because it takes Mars 2 years to go all the way around and meet up with Saturn again. That's the period, that's the orbital period of Mars. And so it's not just a coincidence, because we know how the 8R13 in Esther happened. It happened by a lot in which God controlled and allowed 245 no's to transpire before he finally said yes. And he said yes on this 8R13. It's not saying yes to genocide the Jews. It's saying yes, that's going to be when the children of Bethlehem are getting killed. And it's going to be related to the birth of his son. And the holiday that occurs on Adar 15 as a result of the Esther story in 6 BC when he's born, March the 5th. That March the 5th translates into a Jewish Adar 15. The birthday of Jesus is the Shushan Purim celebration. So that's another date. So you have all these dates that are biblical dates. And now we know when Jesus was born, and it's an additional confirmation that that birth date is correct, because it actually falls on a Shushan Purim celebration that they have every year that actually resembles a national birthday party. Well, let's just quickly summarize the Wiseman timeline, right? It's Adar and Nisan, 4 BC, March, April, okay? So the 7, yellow, right, is the Wisemen inquire with Herod. That's March 7. And then on the 8th, they travel to Bethlehem. On the 9th, they're told to leave. Okay. On the 13th, of course, on the 8th, they're seeing the star again as they travel to Bethlehem. On the 13th is the blood moon, fast of Purim on the Adar 13. And that starts about 2 a.m., 2 to 3 a.m. Blood moons, take a few hours sometimes. So that is in the middle of the night, when people would least expect soldiers to arrive to do them harm. And then 27th is the new moon when Herod dies. And then he's mourned for 7 days. And then the 10th is the Passover, right? And then Nisan 15 is the 11th, Feast of Unleavened Bread, and the 17th would also be a high holy day, right? So you can see how it's exactly from the children in Bethlehem getting killed, right? It's exactly 2 weeks to when Herod dies. And then after Herod dies, it's exactly 2 weeks to the Passover. And that's the whole time frame. And once that Passover is finished, at some point they can return home. They're outside of the country, so they're qualified to be permitted to miss the Passover. And so he's not breaking the law. So in 6 BC, in summary, right, February 21, Mary settles into Bethlehem. March the 5th, 12 days later, is a full moon. It's the birth of Jesus. You have Mars, Jupiter, Juno, and a comet all coming together. March 13, Jesus is circumcised 8 days later. And this March 13 is exactly 2 years, 2 solar cycle years to the March 13, 4 BC, when the children in Bethlehem are killed. And March 20 is a new moon with no apparent event. But then on April the 4th is the full moon. And that is Nisan 15, blood moon at her feet. Mary and Jesus can't attend the Passover. And so it's a blood moon. It's his first Passover, but she's still ceremonially unclean, and so she can't attend. And then April the 18th is the new moon, which is day 44, and so he's brought to be presented in the temple, and the planets align, very much like Joseph's dream, in which his parents give obeisance and his brothers give obeisance to him in the form of a star vision. And we see a very similar star vision arrangement with 11 stars and the sun and the moon, with Jupiter in the center, as it were, all close together. As it were, Jupiter being in the center is receiving obeisance from all the others around him. on the day of presentation in the temple when Simon and Anna give obeisance to Jesus. So the star vision of Joseph was a shadow of the obeisance that Jesus would receive, written in the stars on the day of presentation. And that is the dates and the concluding summary. It's impossible that this arrangement of days could occur and the time frames match the biblical events. And the signs are always appropriate to that time frame, fulfilling scriptures by heavenly signs.